Thank you so much for being here tonight. Poets and farmers and gardeners. You're a great crowd, actually. I was talking to you. Thank you so much, Eric and the Linda Hall Library. I was learning that Linda and Herbert Hall were actually agriculturalists. They were grain farmers. So in a way, bringing a book of poetry about gardening feels right. And what is older than needing to learn how to take care of the earth? Nothing, except maybe poetry. Tonight, when I first launched this anthology, my son asked, "Are you going to read the whole thing?" And I said, no. But what will happen tonight is that a wonderful progression of very distinguished poets, some of the best poets writing in America today, are going to read their own poem, which they have gifted the anthology, as well as a poem of another person. And these are such distinguished poets, and we have such short time that I'm not going to read their full biographies. In fact, they're just going to be projected quickly on the screen beside me while I tell you a little bit about them. Anne Fisher Worth is the author of 8 books of poems and a retired professor at the University of Mississippi. Anna V.Q. Ross won the Benjamin Saltman Poetry Award from Red Hen Press, and she raises chickens in Dorchester, Massachusetts. Ashley Jones is the Poet Laureate of Alabama and the author of 3 award-winning poetry collections, most recently, Reparations Now. Hannah Fries, who actually helped me edit this collection, is the author of the poetry collections Little Terrarium and Being with Trees, and she gardens in the Berkshires. Jason Myers is an Episcopal priest and the author of a book called Maker of Heaven. And he edits a wonderful anthology called Eco-Theo about the overlap between ecology and theology. Patty Crane has just translated the beautiful works of Thomas Tranströmer. Ruben Quesada is an award-winning editor of a book on Latinx poetics. Sophie Cabot Black has a wonderful new book about farming coming out from Grey Wolf Press, and she publishes regularly in The New Yorker and the Paris Review. And Susan Wen has a debut poetry collection called Dear Diaspora, which had a poem that just won my heart over. And she's also the senior editor at Hayden's Fairy Review. So that is, in brief, the handful of wonderful poets we're going to be hearing from tonight. Eventually, their bios will show up behind me. This anthology has its roots maybe in the fact that I'm a lifelong gardener. I grew up going to community gardens in Wisconsin. I did a community garden in New York, in Brooklyn, for the years that I lived there. I farmed for a year in the Berkshires. But it also has its roots in the pandemic, when Hannah, who's a dear friend and knew me when I farmed in the Berkshires, called me and said, "There's something I want to talk to you about." And she said, "We need a new anthology of gardening poetry. We need something that's diverse and alive to this moment when we're tending a planet we feel like we might be losing." And the timing couldn't have been better because I had just been outdoors in the front yard and I literally had dirt under my fingernails. And it was a time during the pandemic when, while I was gardening in the front yard, my neighbors would approach at a distance and drop off a tomato seedling, or talk at great distance about how they were raising shiitakes in the side yard. And there was a kind of community that we formed that our plants could be friends even when we couldn't. But I also thought about how it is that spaces that are gardens bring in diversity from the soil up. They invite in pollinators. My community garden in Brooklyn had 42 species of pollinator on that block, and the other blocks nearby in Brooklyn had 4 to 5 species of pollinator. And so there's something kind of magical that happens when we invite ourselves to be part of the actions of Earth and take care of it a little, and it takes care of us back. But I wanted to invite in the diverse, robust community of people who is writing about this tending today. So with that in mind, you'll hear from them, but also just this first poem in this lovely book that's now full of rich illustrations and a ribbon bookmark. which for a poet is like a bucket list item. This is a poem by the wonderful gardener, poet, and scholar of joy, Ross Gay. After I read this poem, the poets will come up in alphabetical order, and they will read their poems, and then we will go out into the night. Ross Gay, a small, needful fact is that Eric Garner worked for some time for the Parks and Rec Horticultural Department, which means perhaps that with his very large hands, perhaps in all likelihood, he put gently into the earth some plants which, most likely, some of them in all likelihood, continue to grow, continue to do what such plants do, like house and feed small and necessary creatures, like being pleasant to touch and smell, like converting sunlight into food, like making it easier for us to breathe.
So nice to be here. What a nice crowd, too. So thank you for making me part of this project, and I'm glad to be here tonight. I'm going to read, first of all, a poem that I chose by another poet in the book, Danusha Lamaris, and this is called Feeding the Worms. Ever since I found out that earthworms have taste buds all over the delicate pink strings of their bodies, I paused, dropping apple peels into the compost bin. Imagine the dark, writhing ecstasy, the sweetness of apples permeating their pores. I offer beets and parsley, avocado and melon, the feathery tops of carrots. I'd always thought theirs a menial life, eyeless and hidden, almost vulgar. Though now it seems they bear a pleasure so sublime, so decadent, I want to contribute however I can, forgetting a moment my place on the menu. Great last line. And then, I live in Mississippi, and this is a Mississippi poem, because I finally have learned to not only deal with, but also even like the summers in that God-forgotten climate. Mississippi invocation, come green, fill our veins with tendrils and broad-lobed leaves, wave as the rain approaches, teach us the secret of swoon, exhaustion. Come, great-petaled magnolias, scrotal figs in the crooks of branches, scarlet bells of Carolina creeper, bruised gardenias, mosses and lichens that fur the bark of oaks. Come fungi, come buzzards, this teeming is death, is teeming. The walls of our houses, the doors of our senses dampen and soften, plunge us into sleep and deliquescence. We are sap and vine and solstice. Ooze us, rot us, make us hot and hotter. Jasmine, wisteria, twine us and snare us. Stupefy us with your sugary blossoms. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Anna VQ Ross. It's a pleasure to be here and a wonderful group of people to hear these poems. I've been to a few of these leaning towards light launches, and they just always fill me with this sense of possibility, you know, that I could leave here now and go plant something and see what comes of it in the next months. I'm going to read I'm going to start with a poem by C.D. Wright called Song of the Gourd. And for me, this poem does what Tess was talking about, sort of teaches us the possibility of gardening as a way to change your life. Song of the Gourd. In gardening, I continued to sit on my side of the car, to drive whenever possible at the usual level of distraction. In gardening, I shat nails, glass, contaminated dirt, and threw up on the new shoots. In gardening, I learned to praise things I had dreaded. I pushed the hair out of my face. I felt less responsible for one man's death, one woman's long-term isolation. My bones softened. In gardening, I lost nickels and ring settings. I uncovered buttons and marbles. I lay half the worm aside and sought the rest. I sought myself in the bucket and wondered why I came into being in the first place. In gardening, I turned away from the television and went around smelling of offal and inedible parts of the chicken. In gardening, I said Excelsior. In gardening, I required no company. I had to forgive my own failure to perceive how things were. I went out bare-legged at dusk and dug and dug and dug. I hit rock. My ovaries softened. In gardening, I was protean as in no other realm before or since. I longed to torch my old belongings and belch a little flame of satisfaction. In gardening, I longed to stroll farther into soundlessness. I could almost forget what happened many swift years ago in Arkansas. I felt like a god from down under, Chthonian. In gardening, I thought, this is it. Body and soul, I am home at last. Excelsior, praise the grass. In gardening, I fled the fold that supported the war. Only in gardening could I stop shrieking, stop, stop the slaughter. Only in gardening could I press my ear to the ground to hear my soul let out an unyielding noise. My lines softened. I turned the water onto the joy-filled boy child. Only in gardening did I feel fit to partake, to go on trembling in the last light. I confess the abject urge to weed your beds while the bittersweet overwhelmed my daylilies. I summoned the courage to grin. I climbed the hill with my bucket and slept like a dipper in the cool of your body, besotted with growth, shot through by green. C.D. Wright. C.D. Wright. And this is my poem from the anthology. It's called After All. It's a love poem about abortion. After all, even when the garlic crop is good, something else is always dying. The peas withering in the afternoon we hoped for rain instead of watering. The tomatoes overshaded. It should teach us something about pathos or fate, but really, couldn't we have tried harder, predicted the week of heat when the spinach bolted? The trouble with gardening is there's rain and wind and sun to blame. Like the woman in the buffer zone outside the clinic who spat at me and screamed, "What kind of man is he to bring you here?" While I held your hand and our daughter curled in her crib at home with the sitter. Afterward, I dozed against you on a park bench overlooking the city until I was ready to go back to work. But that's not gardening. And still, there's the garlic, those round, paper-skinned heads you pulled this morning and carefully laid out to dry on the driveway's warm, flat bed below our window. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, it's good to one person in here. Good evening. I'm Southern, so I'm used to the response when I call. So my name is Ashley Jones, and I'll be reading 2 poems tonight. The first is by Ilya Kaminsky, and both poems that I'll read deal with grief. After her funeral, I became an environmentalist. I love the planet because my mother is in it. I lie down and kiss the earth's pink, balding forehead. And this is my own poem. It's about my dad, and I wrote this poem when he was still alive. He was an avid gardener. In his day job, he was a fire chief and a paramedic, and to de-stress, he would go out to the garden, and we always had fresh fruits and vegetables, beautiful flowers, all throughout my childhood and adulthood. During the first year of lockdown, we were totally good on produce because we had it in the backyard. This poem was one that I wrote and read for him on his birthday many years ago at an event that I was asked to write for, and I kind of surprised him with it, and he cried, although he said he didn't cry because he wasn't a crying man. But he was the most wonderful father anyone could ever ask for. And so it's fitting, I think, tonight that I read this poem because it's his birthday today, his 62nd birthday. So he is watching me from heaven read this poem. It's called Photosynthesis. When I was young, my father taught us how dirt made way for food, how to turn over soil so it would hold a seed, an infant bud, how the dark could nurse it until it broke its green arms out to touch the sun. In every backyard we've ever had, he made a little garden plot with room for heirloom tomatoes, corn, carrots, peppers, jalapeno, bell, and poblano, okra, eggplant, lemons, collards, broccoli, pole beans, watermelon, squash, trees filled with fruit and nuts, Brussels sprouts, herbs, basil, mint, parsley, rosemary, onions, sweet potatoes, cucumber, cantaloupe, cabbage, oranges, Swiss chard, and peaches, sunflowers tall and straight-backed as soldiers, lantana, amaryllis, echinacea, pansies and roses and bushes bubbling with hydrangeas. Every plant with its purpose, flowers to bring worms and wasps. Even their work matters here. This is the work we have always known, pulling food and flowers from a pile of earth. The difference now, my father is not a slave, not a sharecropper. This land is his, and so is this garden. So is this work. The difference is that he owns this labor, the work of his own hands, for his own belly, for his own children's bellies. We eat because he works. This is the legacy of his grandmother, my great-granny, Ollie Mae Harris, and her untouchable flower garden. Just like her hats, her flower beds sprouted something special, plants and colors the neighbors could only dream of. He was young when he learned that this beauty is built on work, the cows and the factories in their stomachs, the fertilizer they spewed out, the stink that brought such fragrance. What you call waste, I call power. What you call work, I make beautiful again. In his garden, even problems become energy, beauty. My father has ended many work days in the backyard, worries of the firehouse dropping like grain. My father wrist deep in soil. I am convinced the earth speaks back to him as he feeds it. It is a conversational labor, gardening. The seeds tell him what they will be, The soil tells seeds how to grow. My Father speaks sun and water into the earth. We hear him each harvest, his heartbeat sweet like fruit. Thank you.
Good evening. It's such a pleasure to be here tonight and to have so many of the contributors in this book here in one place. It's lovely. I'm going to read, I'm Hannah Fries, by the way, but the first poem I'm going to read is by Janine Lentine. It's called Interview with the Pear Tree. And so as interviews tend to work, there are questions and there are answers. And I'm going to kind of indicate two different speakers like this and try not to hit the microphone in awkward ways. Interview with the pear tree. When did you start making pears? What is a pear? She runs her fingers over one hanging on the branch. Yes. It began before I could be seen, when the great body rang, striking for the first time the earth. Over the long day it lay in the sun, and the birds came, and the flesh fell away until all that was left was the seed. Maybe it was when the moon swelled the seed, maybe when the first true leaf quickened. Did you always know you would make pears? I wouldn't know how not to. What is your process? I let the leaves come to the branch, and when the bee is at the blossom, I listen. Is dormancy difficult? Dormancy? A period when nothing happens. The tree pauses. I've never had one. What about drought? I spread my root hairs and wait. Do you ever doubt? When the bud breaks the green wood. Do you ever think of making apples? What is an apple? Could you describe the kind of pears you make? A ripe pear drops into her upturned hands. That's just so fun to read. I've never met Janine, but I thank her for the opportunity for that. This is my poem, Insects with Long Childhoods. June bug, stag beetle, cicada, 3, 7, 13 years as larvae feasting underground in the gentle rot of roots and cast-offs. Gone generations. Only a few weeks in the light, sharp as the blades of consciousness. Incessant buzz, cosmic background of loss, threaded through late summer's throbbing days, lush nights, a brevity so full it must feel like the eternity they came from. I have a child who asks a question of the air's every hum. He has not learned grief. Sky, he says, and shovels soil into his mouth. Lets it drip out mud. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you, Ashley, for priming everyone. Even though I'm an Episcopal priest, I was in the Baptist church for a number of years before that, so I'm used to the response. And thank you for it. And before being an Episcopal priest, I worked for a number of years as a healthcare chaplain. And I think the most difficult thing that I ever did in that work or in the work of parish ministry is witnessing the loss of a child. And so I'm really grateful to the poet Danusha Lemaris for this poem that stands in that holy and difficult place. Working in the garden, I think of my son, who is nothing now but a few fistfuls of ash. Not even that, since ash dissolves and is taken into the bodies of plants or swept into the air on the wind. He's so very fine he slips undetected through a whale's baleen or a beetle's gullet. He can even rise through a stalk of grass with the upward pool of phloem in these first green days of spring. He has no use now for the soft black hair through which I would run a slender comb, nor for his oddly shaped thumbs, nor anything in this world. Though the things of the world may have use of him, his molecules filtering through them, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, a whisper of hydrogen, the modest building blocks of life, quietly and without announcement. Thank you. Thank you, Danusha. Thank you, Tess, for making this beautiful book and for including this poem in it. This is called Closing In. More and more needles fall from the pines. Everywhere symbols, if that's your thing. To live always in the possible, to urge your flesh to be as keen as melons softening on summer sad vines. I am tired of everything that isn't lovely. I am tired of the way my shoulders hoard stress, stacks and stupid stacks. Everybody's an expert in somebody else's business. I do not want to be any busier than my basil plant, swallowing the sun, the soil, the errant water. We suppose we know a thing or two about botany, about the intelligence of leaf, stem, root. Have you noticed the way plants lean, as though longing for news from a neighbor, a song, a touch, just a little touch? It has been a hard season for bodies, for the given strangeness of care. Even now, the kind music of a lark lingering in the crepe myrtle has something bereft about it, like a whistle moving through lips, sounds going and coming, the desirer closing in on the desired. Thanks.
Hello. I'm Patty Crane. Thank you all for coming. This is a lovely event. Tess. I'm going to read 3 short poems, but before I do, I just need to say this, that I'm from the hills, the small hill town in western Massachusetts, where we have a good amount of snow right now, and our hoop house just produced for us, which normally happens not until March, our winter crop of spinach. And right before I came, I had a great big bowl of freshly picked spinach in very, very snowy Windsor, Massachusetts. And that's worth celebrating. There's nothing like it. I'm going to start with a poem by Michelle Gillette, who was a very dear friend of mine, and I know there are others in this room who knew Michelle. And she left this world too soon, and I miss her terribly. This poem is called Daffodils, and she was a wonderful gardener and poet. Daffodils. Some effort of light keeps the dusk unfinished. Lying on my back, stretching the leg muscle tight from bending over flower beds, planting for a season I can only imagine. All I see through the skylight is sky, and what moves over it, a V of geese, a cloud, a leaf. These are all we need of memory. What passes through the firmament, what the dead would see looking up if time made no barrier between coming and going. My mind keeps the after images, skein of birds, cloud, leaf, what my hands held before burying. 300 bulbs huddle under earth. 300 odds against weather. When the darkness takes over, I close my eyes. Everything is just where I left it. So this is a poem by me. Thank you. Michelle. Michelle. This is my poem. It's called Sunday. I rip everything out. The rugged cabbage stumps, frost-killed basil stalks, withered squash vines. Pull up stakes, unwind twine, and one by one, lob rotten tomatoes onto the compost. He plows it all back into earthy rows, then scythes a patch of asters by the shed where, side by side, we stack the wire cages for next year's crop. If this land is the sermon, our hands in it must be some kind of appeal. The blue wheelbarrow full of onions, friable amber skins I cart to the barn, leaving the south doors open wide, not an arm's length of cord over a peg in the rough pine wall, and in the dust-lit quiet, braid. And this last poem, thank you. And this last poem I'll read is by Czesław Miłosz. It's called Gift. A day so happy. Fog lifted early. I worked in the garden. Hummingbirds were stopping over honeysuckle flowers. There was no thing on earth I wanted to possess. I knew no one worth my envying him. Whatever evil I had suffered, I forgot. To think that once I was the same man did not embarrass me. In my body, I felt no pain. When straightening up, I saw the blue sea and sails. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm going to start by reading a poem by a poet based in Portland named David Beispiel. The poem is called Laurelhurst. Green on yellow, wings along the hedges, the arrow sharp leaves, or along the low silver fences, along bark and sawed limbs and stray crows. Everything a little late May still wet, full hour from last light. then splotches, then ash of stars in the milling, rich, wet silica sponge of the sky. The moment I can taste the rain gurgling in the air, the gray paste of clouds through the tree limbs, like a wash or a stain, I'm sitting in the kitchen, dark, at the formica table, short of breath, my grief as large as a sun's. Alone in such an hour, my body is a scar aching behind my neck. Patch of green lawn, newly planted corn, tomatoes, wayside compost deep in the ground. The day I dug out the garden, I felt like weeping, and later in bed, watching the sky pass inside the open windows, I slept crooked as a feather. In dogs asleep on the floor, in metal wisp of stars, in the wind, in the window sashes, I remember white roses, lapping of water in a silver bowl, silver and red tomato cages, blue planters, the season bleeds with it. And this is my poem. Thank you, Tess. Thanks, everyone, for being here. This is called My Mother is a Garden. In the backyard, my mother plants strands of razzleberry fringe flowers. Next door, the chartreuse golden feather, farewell. Before I am born, my mother is acquired by the United States. Coerced by some American zodiac dream, she fled to Los Angeles, and decades later, she still withholds from speaking English, and only the fertile names of flowers have taken root. She is luminous, her hair a blackish gray against the philodendron, long and parted in the center. I lose her in the shade of overgrown impatiens hanging onto the hillside behind the house. The horizon waves in lines of barberry and nettles, silver waves of wild deer grass. I have not spoken to my mother in years. Today, I surprise her with a visit, and in the window's glow, I watch her work. I have taken the shape of her hips. Thank you.
Sorry. Looking up, not looking down. I'm Sophie Cabot-Black. Delighted to be here. And I just want to say this is an amazing anthology. Tess, you are amazing for all you do, your poetry and your vision and your anthologizing. It's remarkable. I've given it away for Christmas. I have feedback from those who I've given it away to, which is great because they're not poets. They love it. It goes well for all kinds of occasions. But the other thing that's really cool is that I've been reading from it for Tess and for one other event. And every time I hear somebody else reading what they've chosen to read from it, it's like a garden that has those surprise plants in them where they pop out and they're all of a sudden there and you think, oh, hearing it that way, or I forgot that was in that book. And it's been really great. So it's the kind of anthology you can just jump into and jump out of and find really wonderful poems that change, much like a garden changes. Anyway, so I'm going to read a Tom Gunn poem. There's two in here. This one is called Considering the Snail. The snail pushes through a green night, for the grass is heavy with water, and meets over the bright path he makes where rain has darkened the earth's dark. He moves in a wood of desire, pale antlers barely stirring as he hunts. I cannot tell what power is at work, drenched there with purpose, knowing nothing. What is a snail's fury? All I think is that if later I parted the blades above the tunnel and saw the thin trail of broken white across litter, I would never have imagined the slow passion to that deliberate progress. And my contribution to the anthology is called The Garden. Even by the gate, we could not see the rose. Only gone stalks, the paving stones upturned, the reach of wild cherry, beech, and ash over the rusted post, as if to claim whatever rises as their own. Who moves first decides. Clear the root, the withered stem, the slash to burn next season. Stakes of names and faded packets piled, cast out by the entrance as the plow waits for us to make sense of each original harrow, tamp, or hardened mound. This year will be better. The mole and crow, each to their corner, as the horse turns to watch you, deep in the dirt, to start with the one good and simple seed. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Susan, and I will be starting with a poem by the poet Jenny Shia. From Tending. A walk through the garden sets off the mind's tripwires. This year, the wisteria murmur, then ring out of season. The light, raucous, or the light, slow and scummed. Which is it? 1 hour loosens from the socket of another. The rain's not yet done, but the light comes, feeling its way back, as it does. The interior smells fecund, but the greening's abbreviated by the carbon blade of shears. Oneself prunes violently at all the others, thinking she's the gardener. Even so, the blossoms drip, spill over. A few inches above, the sticky murmur of flies. Disorder begins to flare. There are roots long in the earth, and they hasten. And pink worms out of sight, with their dim impulse to let the dirt churn through them. And my poem, this is actually the last poem in my collection, Dear Diaspora, and it's titled Unending. I am learning how to hold grief in my mouth, something alive until it isn't, like a field is a field until it isn't, until it is just the color green. Listen when I tell you how a field folds into a clover when I'm on my hands, how the memory of what I'm looking for is not as important as the ground it claims. I don't mean that grief can be unalive, or that I keep it loaded in that place between lower lip and teeth. I mean, I never walked the land where my father harvested seeds. In his field, he waited for green to bend into gold, a single blade splitting light until there was nothing else. My father remembers. I watch my shadow. Thank you.
What a wonderful audience you are. Thank you. There are enough gardeners here that you know what green tomatoes are. One of the beauties of being with plants the whole way is that you eat them in not supermarket ways. You eat the sprouts. You eat the roots. When the roots get hard, you pickle them. When the plant goes to seed, you save the seed or you grind it up as a spice and you live with it. And of course, green tomatoes happen in California in October, which is also a season we now call fire season. So this poem is called Green Tomatoes in Fire Season. There is smoke in the air when I go pick them. I go despite panic, also because inside I'll make chutney. For an hour or so I unlatch them. It is late fall. They will not ripen. Firm pale green skins find coated in ash. Our fire season goes all autumn now, though today's fire is not yet near to us. But the green tomatoes, I love their pale lobes. Tonight, God willing, we will fry some with cornmeal and fish. Inside the air purifier whirs. I will boil them with molasses and raisin, jar them for friends and for the winter. Disaster, we say, meaning bad star. These are good green stars. This is also their season. Mask on, I bend and bend to the vine. I bend and salvage what I can. Thank you all for being here tonight. There are many books to buy. I would be happy to sign them for you. I know that many of these poets will be happy to sign them as well. I would love to continue some of the great conversations we started earlier. It's really a delight. Thank you, Eric and Linda Hall Library. I'm just going to close with one final poem. And my friend, the poet Forrest Gander, made this joke early on in the readings of this anthology, and I just have to keep making it. He said, I wrote this poem in the year 1818 under the pseudonym John Keats. On the grasshopper and cricket. The poetry of earth is never dead. When all the birds are faint with the hot sun and hide in cooling trees, a voice will run from hedge to hedge about the new mown mead. That is the grasshopper's. He takes the lead in summer luxury. He has never done with his delights, for when tired out with fun, he rests at ease beneath some pleasant weed. The poetry of earth is ceasing never. On a lone winter evening, when the frost has wrought a silence, from the stove there shrills the cricket's song, in warmth increasing ever, and seems to one in drowsiness half lost, the grasshoppers beneath some grassy hills. Thank you.
Thank you, Tess, for a wonderful evening. Thank you, poets, and thank you all for attending our program. Visit lindahall.org for information about the library and info on all of our upcoming events. A lot of you are from out of town, but we live stream almost all of our programs, so I hope you visit us again, whether it's online or when you come back to Kansas City. Thank you, and get your copy of the book.